Hey friends, this is Artist in Residence Matt with Art with a Heart and Healthcare. I got a lot of positive feedback from that last palm tree beachy painting that I made, so I decided I would make another one. This is same idea, same colors, just different composition. Just kind of going to go through the process again and show you how you can use these same tools to create just different fun, easy to paint landscapes. So I started by using blue, or rather turquoise paint from Blick Student Tempera Paints, and mixing it with a little bit of white. I like to put some streaks in there. I like to make my streaks like diagonal sometimes when I'm painting the sky. I feel like it makes it look more dynamic, makes it kind of seem like there might be some loose kind of clouds stringing through the sky. And then I also like what you can see here is making fluffier clouds, or I guess they'd call them cumulus or cumulonimbus clouds. But that's, just a fun weird fact. Anyway, so by using the blue and white, we get some cool streaks in the sky. And then I just take white while that background is still wet. I'll take white and I fluff in those white clouds. Now I like to put a bit of white paint on one side of the brush and then make small circles, keeping that side of the brush that has the paint on it facing towards whatever my sun is going to be, right? And that kind of gives it these nice sharp highlights that really make it stand out from the background, that blue background. So I realized when I was painting this that I went a little farther down with my horizon line than I did in my original example. So I brought the horizon line up. You see me, I kind of covered over some of those clouds, and that's okay. Sometimes making art is just a process of exploration and experimentation. To make that land in the back, I just made some green using yellow and turquoise paint, or you can do it with yellow and blue. And I added a little bit of white to make it fade into the background a little bit. And then I started adding the water. So it looks like there's maybe like an island far off across the water there, and then you've got a nice body of water in between that land back there and where we as the viewer are standing. When I do my water, depending on what what the perspective is, and these kind of simple beachy ones, I try to make sure that I'm using horizontal brush strokes, so back and forth, left to right brush strokes, and that gives a sense of depth when I make, when you make the lines in the back, the waves in the back a little tinier, thinner streaks, and then up front maybe a little chunkier so you can see more of the white foam from the water. You'll also see that I put some yellow in the foreground. Now, when I paint water, I like to add some yellows and sometimes even oranges as almost like a layer underneath the blues. Because if you're at a beach, if you ever go to a beach where the water's nice and clear, you can kind of see the sand. You can kind of see the reflection of the sand coming up through the water. And it gives it almost like a turquoisey, yellowish sort of tint to it. And that's what I was trying to accomplish here. So if it seems weird that I'm throwing that yellow color in there, just let it dry a little bit while you're working on some of the other painting. And then you can go in just like this and start adding some more blues and some more little waves, little crests of the waves using the white paint. To do the crests of the waves, I use a very similar technique as the clouds, and I put white paint on one side, and then I drag the brush. Instead of making the fluffy circles like you see in the sky, I'll make long, thin streaks, horizontal, left to right, brush strokes, and that makes it look like there's waves. Now, if you vary the pressure while you're doing that, it gives you some interesting shapes and makes it look natural, which is what you want. In the foreground here, I started painting in the beach, and since I don't have like a tan color or anything like that, I had to make one. I like mixing my colors just from my primaries. I find I get some more like natural transitions between colors. The palette seems to be a little bit more unified. For me, I don't have a lot of experience with choosing colors ahead of time for a palette. I just kind of like to dive in using those primary colors and just see where it goes from there. That sort of allows me to build my own tones for it without, having it be too much of a mechanical process. There are definitely other ways to go about doing this, and I can't say that this is better than any other way, but it's just the way that I'm comfortable doing it. And I'm sure if you do this enough, you'll find a way that's comfortable for you too. So for the beach in front, I used a mix of yellow, and then I also mixed some red and blue to make purple, and I mixed that as well. When you mix purple and yellow, you get brown. And of course, depending on how much of each, you will get either a darker or a lighter shade of brown, right? So again, I use the purple for the base of my palm tree trunks. And just did the two long tree trunks. One in the foreground, you see it kind of goes past the frame on the bottom, and the other one is a little bit behind it. You see it's a little shorter, it stops a little higher. That's because we're looking at this at kind of a downward angle. With some green, I turn my brush sideways. I use a flat brush and turn it sideways and lightly sketch in some of the palm frond trees. And while that's drying, I take a tiny little brush and sketch out my table. Now the table is really just kind of like an oval. It's like a squished oval, and then I put the four legs on there. And I started with white and added some shadows in there. And you can even do it the other way. You could start it with a darker color and then add the lighter colors as a highlights. There's no real wrong or right way to do it. This is just how I approach it. I like to paint little chunks at a time, and I go back and forth. So while the left side of my painting is drying, maybe I can work on the right side, and vice versa. So, I was just checking to see if it was dry. The sand was dry, so I could paint some of this grass on here. I also, you saw, took some of that purple color and the one that I was using for the shadows of the table, and I put, again, with my flat brush, turning it sideways, I put some more palm frond streaks next to the tree up there by the top, so it kind of looks like maybe some of the leaves are getting light, some of them are getting some shadow. And, we're just trying to make it look interesting and have some cool colors and then make it nice and balanced. And you see again, while those things are drying, I'm adding a little bit more value to my water. I'm trying to add some more blues and some more greens and maybe some more waves with the white paint. Now, sometimes it's good. I like to just kind of, blend colors together and not worry too much about where the chips fall. But it's also a good habit occasionally to make sure that you want to clean your brush. Like if you're painting a light color, for instance, here, I was starting to do highlights on my tree. I wanted to lighten up the tree a little bit. So I want to make sure I get all the purple paint off there initially so it doesn't muddy up my colors that I'm using. The trees on this, I built up a little bit more. I like having things in the foreground more detailed, and of course that makes more sense too, right? If you were standing in a field or at a beach, the things closest to you, you would see the detail more on them than the ones in the distance. And that's another aspect of atmospheric perspective, something that's really useful to get the hang of, and you hear me talk about in a lot of my videos because it's a really valuable tool to create depth. And it's very simple to do. So you see we're adding some of the highlights. Now I did for this one add a little bit of white. I used some yellow and some white, and that contrasts really well with the purple. So this purples on those trees in the foreground are going to make some really intense shadows, and they're going to be intense because it's dark purple pretty close to you, and it's a big space. It's a long area. But when we add those yellow highlights, it makes that purple stand out even more. And that's one of the beauties of contrast. Sometimes if you're working on an object and you're trying to make it stand out, maybe it's not necessarily that object that you need to focus on. Maybe it's the things around it that you're either going to use to subdue that element or to enhance it, to bring it out a little bit more, bring more attention to it. Again, using the same shadowy colors, the purples and maybe some browns. Browns is a lot of fun because, You can have all different kinds of browns. You can get brown by mixing red and green. You can get brown by mixing purple and yellow, orange and blue. All kinds of different ways to get brown. In this one, I wanted to sort of stay with the purple and yellow theme, but I do occasionally get a little bit darker, almost even into the reds a little bit, but not too much, because it would sort of be out of place with the rest of the painting. You see I'm just going over and adding some more highlights to the palm trees, and back and forth, highlights and shadows, enhancing the shadows, enhancing the highlights. It's just kind of a process of finding out, or defining rather, the objects as you're working on them, right? We use contrast to help define those objects a little bit. You'll also see that there's some purple trails sort of diagonally shooting off of the bottom of those trees. And that's because that's where our light's coming from. Our light's coming from the left of the scene. So you'll see the highlights on the left side of the palm trees, but you'll also see a shadow cast on the right side of the object. So here I'm starting to add shadows for the table. Now, until you add shadows, most objects in a scene will seem like they're floating, or if they've been pasted on, and they don't quite fit. But that's largely what painting or rendering is about, is observing how light falls on an object, right? So in this scene, you have the table, and you want to observe how the light hits that left side of the table, how it hits the top and the legs of it, and then where the shadow is cast. In this case, the shadow is being cast onto the beach. Just like with the palm trees, the light is hitting the left side of those palm trees. It's also hitting the palm fronds or the palm leaves. And that gets a little bit more complex because those palm leaves are floating all over the place, and they're waving and they're catching light, and some of them are behind other ones, and you've got foreground and background. You've got so many different layers of plants, and that's why, I mean, there are different ways to approach this. You can be much more calculated about it, but I like the freedom of expression in painting. I like to be able to feel my way through it and to just keep an eye on the balance of things. If I have too much highlight in an area, then I'll add some shadow. If I have too much shadow in an area, again, I'll add some highlight. With this technique that I use, it's important to think about that balance, but it's also important to think about your brush strokes. Now, like when we were painting the water, we wanted our brush strokes to be left to right, horizontal brush strokes, so we could organically create that appearance of waves rolling towards the shore. With palm leaves, it's a little bit different. We want to turn our brush sideways, and then we're brushing in quick, short strokes. We're just imagining what a palm leaf looks like, right? It's a thin, pointy little object, right, that just juts out from a major spine of the leaf, and then that goes back to the actual tree trunk itself. There's some other elements where they meet. Sometimes you have old, residual material from previous palm leaves that have grown and fallen and stuff. And how complicated you want to make it is totally up to you, because this is your art piece. I want to keep it simple, which I'm trying to keep it within a 15-minute time limit here. But anything's possible when you're doing this. You can make this as complex or as simple as you like. Now, I noticed that I had kind of a flat foreground there, and I lightened up. I took some white and some yellow and added it to the beach to show some light perhaps falling on the beach, especially on the left side and towards where the water meets the sand. And that gave us a little bit more body to the foreground with that grass there and the palm trees. It's also going to help us define our table too, so our table doesn't get lost. Now, I did this little glass here of lemonade, and it's kind of hard to see in the video probably because it's really tiny, but what I did was just an oval on top, an oval on the bottom, and then connect them with two parallel lines on the side. And it's pretty easy to do. You can find a lot of tutorials on how to draw cylinders. When I draw glasses, like glass, like a drinking glass, I usually use like a light blue to draw the actual shape of it, the outline of it. And then I'll go in with white or even some darker colors sometimes for highlights inside the glass. Maybe like just a hair away from the side of the glass. It makes it look like a cool little shine. I'm just making a nice little glass of lemonade, so I don't know. It seems like it would be really nice to have on a beachy day. And wow, look at that. We are almost done with this video. It looks like it's pretty much done. You can go back and forth with this. You can spend as much time or as little time as you want doing it. This is all about having a good time. But I hope you learned something today. I hope you practiced a little bit. Maybe even if you already knew what was going on, you get to practice a little bit more. We love making these videos. I know it's been a little while. We've been really busy being back on the hospital floor working with patients. But if you guys enjoy this, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll make more. Thanks so much for your time. See you soon.